If you are new to the channel, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. Now let's begin the story. I was 6 years old when it happened. That puts it in the category of memories that usually come soft around the edges, warm, fuzzy pieces of a childhood quilt. But this one is carved sharp into my brain, like a shard of glass you keep stepping on, no matter how many times you think you've swept the floor. We'd moved to Fairview, Oregon only a month earlier. Dad had taken a job at a shipping company, and Mom was doing her best to make a new town feel like home. She kept us busy, farmers markets on Saturdays, playground visits in the evenings, and trips to the Fairview Public Library twice a week. I loved that library from the moment I stepped inside. It was small, 2 floors, red brick walls, ivy curling up the east side, but the smell got me. That mix of paper, dust, and a faint hint of lemon cleaner. It felt safe, familiar. That morning had been ordinary in the best way. Mom had made pancakes. My little sister Lily had tried to feed hers to our cat. And after lunch, Mom announced, "We're walking to the library. You two can pick a book each." It was the kind of promise that made me skip the whole way there. The children's section was tucked in the back right corner of the main floor. 4 short aisles, bright carpet patterned with cartoon letters, a low round table for reading, and 3 bulky computers loaded with kid games that ran so slow you could make a sandwich while they loaded. "Stay here, Max," Mom said, steering Lily toward the picture book area. "I'll be in the next room if you need me." I nodded. I was old enough to manage myself, as Dad liked to say. I started at the computers, but after a few rounds of Math Blaster, I got bored. I decided to find a Where's Waldo book, my obsession at the time. I drifted down an aisle, dragging my hand along the spines. My sneakers squeaked against the polished floor. Then I heard it, a low, playful whisper. "Hey!" I turned. At the far end of the aisle, a man was half hidden, peeking around the shelf. "Peekaboo." It made me laugh. Not the nervous laugh I'd have now, just a real 6-year-old laugh. He smiled, the corners of his mouth tight. He had on a gray windbreaker and a baseball cap pulled low over his forehead. His eyes were locked on me, not in a friendly way, but I didn't know that yet. "What are you looking for?" he asked. "Waldo books," I said. "Oh, I know where those are. This way." And just like that, I followed. He led me toward the back wall, to a low shelf by the windows. Sure enough, there they were. 3. "Where's Waldo? Books." I grabbed The Fantastic Journey. "That's a good one," he said. "Want to look at it together?" I shrugged. "Okay." We sat at a table in the far corner, away from the computers. He opened the book between us, his long finger tracing the crowd scenes. "You're good at this," he said after I found Waldo on the first page. "You in first grade?" I nodded. "What school?" I told him. He kept asking questions about my sister, my house, if my mom ever left me here while she ran errands. I didn't realize it, but his questions had shifted from friendly to something else. Then he said, "There's a secret room downstairs, only for kids who know about it. Got more games than up here." "Downstairs?" I asked. "Yeah, come on, I'll show you." We passed the last row of shelves to a narrow wooden staircase I'd never noticed before. A sign at the top read, "Basement, Staff, and Meeting Rooms." I hesitated. "I don't think I'm supposed to." "It's fine," he cut in quickly. "It's just for kids." The steps groaned under us as we went down. The air changed. Cooler, heavier. The basement smelled like damp cardboard. A row of empty bookshelves lined the walls. At the far end, a door stood half open. He pushed it wide. Inside was a small play area, some worn toys, a low table, a faded rug with letters on it. "See? Pretty cool, huh?" It didn't feel cool. It felt wrong. Too quiet. Too far from upstairs. That's when the intercom crackled. "Max Parker, please come to the front desk. Your mother's looking for you." I looked at him. His expression had changed. Mouth tight, eyes flat. "We'll just play a quick game first," he said, reaching toward the light switch. Click. The room went black. "Hide and seek," he whispered. Something in my chest flipped. My legs moved before my brain caught up. I bolted for the door. I could hear him behind me, clothes rustling, shoes scraping on the floor. The stairs loomed ahead. I took them two at a time, my breath burning my throat. Something hit the floor behind me with a dull thump. I burst into the main floor, nearly colliding with a cart of books. The librarian's head shot up. Mom was beside her, scanning the room, her face lit with relief, then horror when she saw me. "Max!" she cried, pulling me in so tight I couldn't breathe. I tried to speak, but all that came out was, he. The librarian glanced toward the stairwell and picked up the phone. A man in a denim jacket, one of the library staff, rushed past us, disappearing down the stairs. The police came. They searched. No man in a gray windbreaker. No baseball cap. He was gone. We never went back to that library, not once. Even now, 20 years later, I can be walking past a shelf in a bookstore, hear a low peekaboo in my head, and feel that same cold rush in my chest. Because some memories don't fade. They wait, quiet, like someone just around the corner, watching. Story 2. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who practically lived in a library. In high school, I'd only gone when I had to. Group projects, research papers, or the occasional tutoring session. I was the kind of student who could study at my kitchen table with music on and a TV humming in the background. But college changed that. By the time my senior year rolled around, my life was a constant juggling act. Full-time classes, a part-time job at a bakery that opened at 5 a.m., and an internship at a nonprofit law center in the city. I wasn't just tired. I was stretched so thin I sometimes forgot what day it was. The only place I could reliably focus was the downtown Everett Public Library. It was quiet, warm, and open late on weekdays. The tall glass windows looked out over a row of street lamps. The floors creaked faintly underfoot, and the air smelled like paper and old wood polish. By 9 p.m., it was usually just a handful of students, retirees, and the occasional insomniac flipping through mystery novels. That Wednesday in November had been one of my longest days. I'd worked the morning shift at the bakery, sat through 3 back-to-back classes, and spent 4 hours helping review case files at the internship. By the time I left the office, it was dark and drizzling. That kind of misty rain that never quite stops. I ducked into a coffee shop on my way to the library, ordered a black coffee the size of my head, and told myself I'd be home by 10:30. I had a constitutional law exam in the morning, and there was no way I was failing it. Inside the library, the warmth hit me immediately, along with the faint hum of the heater. I nodded to Linda, the evening librarian, a woman in her 50s with wire-rimmed glasses and a quiet, watchful way about her. "Burning the midnight oil again, Ivy?" she asked. "Unfortunately," I said, holding up my coffee, "this is survival fuel." She smiled. "I'll be locking the doors at 9, but you know the drill. You can stay until closing if you are in before then." I headed for my usual spot, a small table tucked into the history section where 2 tall shelves blocked most of the noise from the main reading area. From here, I could see a sliver of the front desk and part of the computer lab, but not much else. Perfect for avoiding distractions. The first hour was blissfully quiet. A man in a gray hoodie tapped away at a computer near the printers, and a girl in a red scarf sat cross-legged on the floor, reading a thick fantasy novel. At some point, they both left. By 9:45, it was just me, Linda at the desk, and the sound of rain on the windows. That's when I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate ones. The kind that weren't in a hurry to get anywhere. They came from the far end of the aisle near the biographies and stopped just out of my sight. I looked up. A man stepped into view. Mid-30s, maybe older. Tall, with sandy hair and a short beard. He wasn't carrying any books or a bag. Just a damp windbreaker. "Sorry," he said, glancing at my table. "Mind if I sit?" I hesitated. There were literally a dozen other empty tables. Sure," I said, pulling my laptop a little closer. He sat diagonally across from me, resting his elbows on the table. I noticed his jacket sleeves were wet, like he'd been standing outside for a while. "Studying?" he asked. "Yeah, big exam tomorrow." "What's the class?" "Constitutional law," I said shortly, hoping he'd take the hint. Instead, he grinned. "Law, huh? That's intense. You must be smart." I gave a polite smile and looked back at my screen. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but I couldn't focus. I could feel his eyes on me. After a moment, he leaned forward. "You come here often? I've been trying to find a good place to get some work done." I shrugged without looking up. "It's quiet here." "That's what I like about it," he said. Then after a pause, "What's your name?" Something in his tone, too casual, too quick, made my stomach tighten. "Aaron," I lied. He smiled wider. "Nice to meet you, Aaron. I'm Nathan." Linda's voice suddenly echoed from the front desk. 15 minutes till closing, I started packing my things, even though I'd planned to stay longer. My pulse was ticking faster than it should have been. "You heading out already?" Nathan asked. "Yeah, early morning," I muttered. As I walked toward the desk, I glanced back. He wasn't moving, just watching me. His head tilted slightly like he was memorizing something. I told Linda quietly, "That guy at my table." "Do you know him?" She frowned. "No, I've never seen him before." Why, I lowered my voice. "He's making me uncomfortable." Her expression hardened. "Hang on." She picked up the phone and called the security desk. While she spoke, I glanced back again and froze. Nathan was gone. The guard, a tall guy named Chris, came in a minute later and did a sweep of the library. No sign of him. Chris walked me to the door. "Need me to escort you to your car?" he asked. I shook my head. "I'm just a couple blocks away." The rain had stopped, but the streets were slick, reflecting the glow of the street lamps. I pulled my hood up and started walking. Halfway down the block, I heard it. Footsteps again, not behind me, across the street, matching my pace. I sped up. So did they. At the corner, I glanced over. Nathan stood under a streetlight, hands in his pockets, smiling faintly. My chest tightened. I turned the corner, pulling my phone from my pocket, and started to dial 911. The next thing I knew, he was in front of me. He'd crossed the street fast, cutting me off. "Hey, Aaron," he said softly. "Why are you walking so fast?" I stumbled back. "Leave me alone." He took a step closer. We didn't get to finish our conversation. A door opened somewhere behind me. A man's voice called out, sharp, loud. "Hey, you okay?" Nathan's eyes flicked past me. Then without a word, he turned and walked away into the dark. The man who'd shouted, a neighbor I vaguely recognized, stood on his porch, phone in hand. "Want me to call the cops?" I nodded, my hands shaking. Police came within minutes. I gave them the description, the name he'd given me, the details from the library. By the time they checked nearby cameras, he was gone. They never found him. That was 2 years ago. I still go to the library, but never at night. And whenever someone sits too close, I feel that same slow, creeping fear crawl up my spine. Because sometimes they're not there to read. Story 3, I never liked libraries much. Not in the I hate reading sense. I love books. But there's something about them that's always made me unsettled. Maybe it's the hush, the way even your own footsteps sound too loud. Maybe it's the smell, paper and dust and something faintly sour if the building's old enough. Or maybe it's the feeling of being watched. Not in an obvious way. More like you can sense someone's eyes on you just beyond your peripheral vision. And the moment you turn your head, there's nothing there but a row of spines staring back. Still, I ended up in one on a Thursday night last November. That semester had been brutal. I was juggling 5 classes at Jackson University in Western Pennsylvania. 2 of them senior-level research courses that each thought they were my only priority. I was also pulling 20 hours a week at a call center to cover rent for my small, drafty apartment off campus. Sleep was optional. Meals were often microwave noodles eaten while flipping through a stack of journal articles. By that night, I was behind on a psychology research paper worth 30% of my grade. My apartment was a disaster. Laundry in piles, dishes in the sink, and my roommate blasting EDM while her boyfriend shouted into a gaming headset. There was no way I could focus there. The campus library was already packed when I checked. Every study room had a reserved sign, and the main floor looked like an anthill. I needed somewhere quiet. That's how I ended up at Millbrook Public Library. It was about a 15-minute drive from campus. A squat, 2-story brick building tucked between an insurance office and a shuttered diner. I'd been there twice before for a class project. It wasn't huge, but it stayed open until 11 p.m., and it never seemed busy. When I pulled into the lot, the sky had the heavy metallic feel that comes before snow. Only a handful of cars sat under the pale yellow glow of street lamps. I killed the engine and just sat there for a second, my breath fogging in the cold. Inside, the warmth hit me first. Then the smell, old paper, wood polish, and faint coffee from somewhere near the circulation desk. "Evening," the librarian said without looking up from her monitor. She was in her 60s, with hair in a loose bun and reading glasses low on her nose. "Hi," I murmured, clutching my laptop bag like a shield. The first floor had that open, airy feel. Rows of books on low shelves, a children's area in the corner, and a small cluster of tables. But I wanted more privacy, so I headed for the stairs. The second floor was different. Dimmer, narrower aisles, taller shelves. It felt older somehow, like time had moved slower up here. I spotted one other person, a man in a gray hoodie sitting at a table near the back, his head down over a notebook. I picked a table near the far wall, wedged between two tall shelves. It felt like my own little hideaway. I opened my laptop, spread out my notes, and got to work. At first, I could hear the faint hum of the HVAC and the occasional creak of wood as the building settled. Then I stopped noticing even that. My world shrank to the glow of my screen and the steady click of keys. Every so often, I'd take a sip from my water bottle or glance at the clock. Time slipped strangely. 8:15 became 9:04 became 9:42 without me registering much in between. At one point, I thought I heard a soft footstep somewhere behind the shelves. But the sound was so faint, I told myself it was just the building, or the man in the hoodie moving to grab a book. I didn't check. Around 10:15, I leaned back, rubbing my eyes. That's when I saw it. A cream-colored envelope sat at the far edge of my table. Neatly placed, not tossed or dropped, placed. I froze. It hadn't been there when I sat down. My gaze darted toward the shelves. Empty. Toward the table where the man in the hoodie had been. Also empty now. Swallowing, I pulled the envelope closer. My fingers tingled. It wasn't sealed. Inside was a single photograph. It was me. From tonight. The angle was from behind. My hunched posture, my laptop open, the glow illuminating my hair. But what made my stomach twist was the distance. The photo had been taken through the narrow gap between two shelves. Someone had been standing there, watching. I turned the photo over. Blank. My chair scraped the floor as I stood. The sound was shockingly loud in the stillness. I scanned the aisle, then stepped into the open space near the stairs. The librarian wasn't in sight, probably still downstairs. Halfway across the floor, I spotted movement. A woman in her 30s, sitting at a corner table with a thick paperback. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice low. "Did you happen to see anyone near my table in the last few minutes?" She looked up, blinking. No. Why?" "Just thought I left something, and it turned up. Didn't see who put it there." Her brow furrowed. "Sorry, I've been pretty into my book." "Right, thanks anyway." I didn't go back to my table. I just stuffed my laptop and notes into my bag, slid the photo back into the envelope, and headed for the stairs. Downstairs, the librarian gave me a polite nod. I mumbled a "good night" and stepped into the cold air. The lot was almost empty now. My car sat under a lamp, the light flickering slightly. I started toward it. That's when I saw the truck, dark blue, backed into a space at the far edge. The headlights were off, but the driver's window was down. Someone was inside. I couldn't see his face clearly, just the outline of a man, the pale shape of hands holding a camera. And then the click. The flash didn't go off, probably disabled. But I knew the sound. My chest tightened. The moment he saw me looking, he lowered the camera, tossed it onto the passenger seat, and started the engine. The rumble echoed across the lot. I froze. He didn't speed toward me, just pulled out smoothly, turned onto the road, and vanished into the night. The drive back to my apartment felt endless. I kept checking the rearview mirror, convinced I'd see headlights following at a steady distance. When I finally parked, I locked the door the second I got inside, pulled the blinds, stood there in the dim light of my kitchen, holding the envelope like it might burn me. Someone had been watching me for hours, close enough to hear me typing, close enough to slip that envelope onto my table without a sound. I never went back to Millbrook Public Library, and sometimes, walking across campus, sitting in a coffee shop, waiting at a crosswalk, I'll feel it again. That slow, creeping awareness, like someone's watching. Story 4. I never planned on working at the Willow Creek Public Library for more than a few months. When I moved to this small Oregon town last spring, it was supposed to be a pit stop, a quiet place to recalibrate after quitting a marketing job in Portland that had drained every ounce of my sanity. My plan was simple: find a part-time gig, save some cash, and figure out what I really wanted to do with my life. The library job came through my aunt, who'd been a volunteer there for years. She told me the work was easy: checking books in and out, shelving returns, answering the occasional question from a confused patron. No corporate meetings, no deadlines, no fake smiles for demanding clients. She wasn't wrong. Most nights were peaceful, almost meditative. The building itself was a two-story brick structure tucked behind a row of shops, the kind of place most people passed without a second glance. Inside, it smelled faintly of paper and lemon polish. The hum of the old fluorescent lights was constant, blending with the soft rustle of turning pages. During the day, the place bustled with kids doing homework, retirees reading newspapers, and the occasional local author lurking by the new releases section, hoping someone would pick up their self-published memoir. But evenings were slow. By 7, the crowd thinned to a handful of quiet regulars. I usually worked the closing shift with Henry, the head librarian. Henry was in his 60s, tall and wiry, with the kind of voice that could hush a room without him raising it. But on Thursdays, Henry left at 6 sharp to attend a chess club across town, leaving me alone until closing at 8. I never minded, or at least I didn't, until that night. It had been raining on and off all day, the kind of cold drizzle that clung to your clothes and made the whole town smell faintly of wet pavement. By 7:30, the library was nearly empty. The only people left were an older man in the newspaper corner, a teenage girl doing homework at a back table, and a young couple whispering over a travel guide. I was behind the front desk, scanning in a stack of returns, when I heard footsteps approaching. I looked up. The man was maybe mid-40s, average build, wearing a dark windbreaker. Nothing remarkable about him at first glance, but his eyes were oddly intense. The kind that don't just look at you, but through you. "Can I help you?" I asked. He didn't smile. "Some of your shelves are completely wrong." I blinked. "Wrong?" "In the history section," he said, his tone clipped. "Books are on the wrong shelves entirely. Honestly, it's embarrassing." His voice had this strange undercurrent, like he was genuinely offended, almost angry. "Oh, thanks for letting me know," I said. "Do you know which titles? I can fix them." "Better if I just show you," he said. "You'll see." Something in my gut tightened. I couldn't have explained why. Maybe it was the way he stood too still, or how his words didn't match his neutral expression. But this was a library, not a dark alley. My instinct to be polite overrode my unease. "All right," I said, coming around the desk. "Lead the way." We walked deeper into the library, past rows of fiction, past biographies, into the far back where the history shelves stood. The overhead lights here flickered faintly, and the corner smelled faintly of dust and rain seeping through the old brick walls. "This section," he said, gesturing vaguely. "See?" I glanced over the spines. Nothing seemed out of place at first. Then I heard it, a metallic click. It was subtle, but distinct. The sound of the emergency exit handle being pushed. My head snapped toward the back wall. The heavy steel door stood ajar, letting in a sharp gust of cold night air. Before I could react, another man stepped inside. He was broader, wearing a beanie pulled low. His eyes swept the aisle, locking on me. "Hey!" I started, but my voice caught as the first man suddenly closed the gap between us. A hand clamped down on my arm, hard. "What the hell?" I yanked back, but the second man was already moving. Fast. They didn't say a word. No threats, no demands. just force. The broader one grabbed my other arm, and together they started pulling me toward the open door. My pulse exploded in my ears. This wasn't random. They had planned this. "Let go!" I shouted, twisting against them. My voice cracked, but it carried through the empty library. The teenage girl in the back looked up, frozen for a second, then bolted toward the front desk, her sneakers squeaking against the carpet. One of the men cursed under his breath. The grip on my right arm loosened for a fraction of a second, enough for me to wrench halfway free. I kicked backward, my heel connecting with someone's shin. He grunted but didn't let go. The cold air from the open exit wrapped around me like a warning. If they got me through that door, I was gone. Then I saw it, the red handle of the fire alarm, just a foot away on the wall. I lunged. One of them realized what I was doing and yanked me back. But my fingers caught the handle and pulled. The alarm screamed to life, sharp and blaring. For half a second, everyone froze. Then chaos. The man holding my left arm shoved me away and bolted through the door, the other following close behind. The steel door banged shut behind them, though it didn't latch. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly missed the handle when I slammed it shut, locking it with trembling fingers. By the time the police arrived, sirens slicing through the night, the men were gone. I gave my statement, but the details were frustratingly blurry. Adrenaline had scrambled my memory. I couldn't even describe their faces clearly. The security cameras caught a partial shot of the first man leading me toward the back, but there were no cameras on the emergency exit itself. Outside, the rain had washed away any footprints. The officers promised to investigate, but weeks passed without updates. I kept working at the library after that, but never closed alone again. And now, every time I walk past that history section, I feel the faintest trace of cold air, as if the door is still open, somewhere in my memory. Story 5. I wasn't the kind of person who spooked easily. I traveled for work for years, hopping between cities, staying in hotels that ranged from charming boutique places to chain motels with carpet that smelled like someone had tried, and failed, to cover cigarette smoke with lemon cleaner. I'd worked in airport lounges, corner coffee shops, train stations, even park benches when the weather was nice. Public spaces never bothered me. If anything, I liked the background hum of strangers. It kept me from feeling lonely. But after what happened in Portland, I can't step into a library without my stomach tightening just a little. It was February, cold enough in Oregon that my breath fogged in the air each morning. My company, a software consulting firm, had sent me to work with a client downtown for 3 weeks. The job wasn't anything exciting, mostly sitting with their in-house team, helping them troubleshoot some back-end integration issues. The hotel they booked me into was a mid-range Marriott right on Southwest Broadway. I could see the streetcars roll by from my 8th-floor window, lights flickering off wet pavement. My schedule was flexible. I worked from the client's office some days, other days from wherever I felt like setting up my laptop. And that's how the Central Portland Library came into play. It was my second day in town when I first noticed it. I just left the client's office around 3 p.m., coffee in hand, and decided to explore. I'd read online that the city's main library branch was beautiful. High ceilings, marble staircases, huge windows. It was only a few blocks away, so I figured I'd check it out. When I turned the corner onto Southwest 10th, I saw it immediately. The glass facade catching the pale winter light, the inside warm and glowing against the gray sky. People moved in and out through revolving doors, the kind of casual weekday crowd you'd expect. College kids with backpacks, an older man in a tweed coat, a mom holding her kid's mittened hand. Inside, the air had that faint paper and ink smell mixed with coffee drifting from a small cafe off to the right. The main lobby opened into a wide staircase leading up to multiple floors. My shoes clicked softly against polished stone as I made my way to the second floor, looking for a quiet spot. That's where I found it. A long row of tables along the tall windows facing the street. The view wasn't much, mostly the brick wall of the building across, but the light was good and there was enough space between tables that you didn't feel cramped. I set up my laptop, put in my earbuds, and started working. It must have been around 4:30 when I noticed him. At first, it didn't even register as strange. He was standing in one of the aisles about 40 feet away, near the section labeled History. Pacific Northwest, tall, maybe early 40s, shaved head, dark coat. He wasn't holding any books, just standing there, angled toward me. When I glanced up again, I noticed the phone in his hands, pointed right in my direction. I hesitated, pulling one earbud out. Was he taking a picture of me? Maybe he was filming something else, and I just happened to be in the frame. I glanced over my shoulder. The tables behind me were empty. When I looked back, he shifted slightly as if adjusting his aim. My chest tightened, but I told myself I was being dramatic. Maybe he was reading something on his phone. Maybe he was texting and holding it weird. People do weird things. Still, I found myself turning my laptop slightly, angling my screen away from him. When I got up 15 minutes later to grab a coffee from the cafe downstairs, I made a point to walk right past his aisle. He was gone. I told myself I was imagining it, that I'd probably never see him again. And for the rest of that work session, I didn't. But as I packed up to leave, I couldn't shake the odd feeling. It was like that moment in a grocery store when you realize you've seen the same stranger in multiple aisles. Too often to be coincidence. The next morning was gray and drizzly. I grabbed breakfast from a diner down the street and, without much thought, headed back to the library to work. I found the same table by the windows, unpacked my laptop, and got into the zone. An hour passed. Then I felt it, that prickle on the back of my neck. I looked up. Same man, same coat, same position in the stacks. This time the phone was clearly angled toward me. Two hands, perfectly steady. I stared at him, heart thudding. My mind went through the checklist. Confront him? Take his picture? Tell staff? For a few seconds, neither of us moved. Then he turned and vanished behind the shelves. That was enough for me. I packed up my stuff in under a minute and walked straight to the front desk. Me. Hi, there's a man upstairs who's been pointing his phone at me. Yesterday, too. It's making me uncomfortable. Librarian, frowning. Did you see if he took any photos? Me. I'm not sure, but it looked like it. Twice now. Librarian. I'll alert security to keep an eye out. If you see him again, let us know right away. She sounded concerned, but I could tell she wasn't alarmed. People do weird stuff in libraries all the time, right? Maybe he was harmless. I walked back to the hotel through wet streets trying to convince myself it was over. It wasn't. The next morning, as I came down the elevator into the hotel lobby, I froze. He was sitting in one of the lounge chairs near the entrance. Same bald head, same coat, sunglasses now, indoors. He didn't look at me directly, just shifted his head a fraction as I passed, like he was tracking movement in his periphery. My pulse spiked. Did he follow me yesterday? Had he been outside when I left the library? How would he even know where I was staying? I kept walking, forcing my steps to stay steady. Outside, I turned down the block, waited a minute, then glanced back through the glass. He was standing now looking toward the doors. I bolted down a side street. The rest of my trip passed without seeing him again. I flew home. I let weeks turn into months, telling myself it was just one of those strange city encounters you laugh about later until it wasn't. It was May when my job sent me to Cleveland. Different project, different client. One night after the office closed, I wandered into the downtown library to finish some notes. It was nearly empty. Just a couple of students and an older man reading a newspaper. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. I was halfway down an aisle scanning book spines when I saw him, standing at the other end. Same shaved head, same coat. No phone this time. Just watching. We locked eyes. My skin went cold. I turned and walked fast toward the front desk. Me. There's a man here who's been following me. Different cities. Please, can you call security? Librarian. Eyes widening. Are you serious? Me. Dead serious. He's at the end of that aisle. She picked up the phone immediately. I turned back. Empty aisle. No sound of footsteps. Security searched the building. They found no one matching my description. Then they pulled up the security footage. It showed me entering. It showed me walking into the stacks. But there was no one at the end of the aisle. No one at all. To this day, I don't know what I saw. But every time I step into a library, I still catch myself glancing between the shelves, half expecting him to be there. watching, waiting, and one day, I'm afraid I'll be right. Story 6, I never thought much about libraries. Not in the way book lovers do. The romantic image of sunbeams catching floating dust motes, or the way the air supposedly smells like wisdom. To me, a library was just a place to get work done without the noise of my apartment neighbor's TV bleeding through the walls. I wasn't a librarian, not even a literature major. I was just stuck. After my father passed, I moved back to my hometown of Halliford, Pennsylvania. I'd been in Philadelphia for years trying to make it in graphic design, but I ran out of savings and rent out There Will Eat You Alive. Halliford was cheaper, quieter, and, according to my mom, a good place to breathe again. I took a part-time job at the Halliford Public Library to make ends meet. The pay was bad, the hours unpredictable, but I told myself it was temporary. 2 months max, then I'd look for something closer to my career field. That was 9 months ago. The building itself was older than I remembered. A red brick rectangle from the 1920s with tall, narrow windows that let in too little light. Inside, the shelves were tall and tightly spaced, creating long aisles that seemed to stretch forever. It wasn't a place designed for comfort. The carpeting was faded and fraying, the lights dim and humming. The air was perpetually cool, almost damp, even in summer. Back again? Clara, the head librarian, had said on my first day, her voice dry with humor. She was in her 60s, small but sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who could tell if you were slacking from across the building. Guess so, I'd said, trying to smile. You'll get used to the quiet, or it'll get to you. She'd winked before disappearing toward the reference desk. I thought she was joking at the time. Evening shifts were my territory. From 5 p.m. to 9 p.m., I'd man the front desk, check in returns, reshelve what I could, and do the final walkthrough before locking up. The library was never busy except during high school finals week, when panicked teens crammed into study carrels like sardines. Most nights I saw the same faces. An older man named Richard, who read war histories without ever checking them out. A woman in her 40s who worked on crosswords with a thermos of tea, and a college kid named Nathan who typed furiously on a laptop until closing. The only part I disliked was the back section, the local history archives. That's where the lighting was weakest, and the aisles were narrow enough that if someone else passed you, your shoulders would almost brush. The walls there seemed to swallow sound. It was late October, a Tuesday night. We were 20 minutes from closing when I went to return a stack of books to the far end of the building. The air felt cooler back there. Not unusual, but sharp enough to make me rub my arms. Halfway down aisle 17, I froze. From somewhere beyond the next row came the sound of books sliding, then the dull thud of one hitting the floor. I called out automatically, "Hello? We're closing in 20 minutes." No response. I stepped around the corner. The aisle was empty, except for a single book lying open face down in the middle of the floor. It was thick, bound in a black cloth cover that looked handmade. No title on the spine, no barcode sticker. I bent down to pick it up, but the moment I touched it, something about the paper struck me. Not yellowed like old novels, but almost gray, coarse and stiff. The ink inside wasn't printed, it was handwritten. Small, dense lines of text in a language I didn't recognize. I glanced toward the end of the aisle, expecting maybe Nathan or Richard, but the space was empty. I shelved it at the nearest spot, technically against protocol, but I didn't feel like carrying it all the way to the front to log in. By the time I got back to the desk, my hands felt cold. "Hey, Clara," I said the next day, "do we have any uncatalogued donations lying around?" She looked up from her monitor. "Not that I know of. Why?" "Found a weird one in the archives last night. No barcode, no title, just, I don't know. Strange." Her brow furrowed. "We don't keep anything down there that isn't logged. Show me when you're in tonight." That evening, I went back to aisle 17. It wasn't there. I checked the entire section, shelf by shelf, thinking maybe I'd absent-mindedly put it somewhere else. Nothing. About a week later, it happened again. I was halfway through closing duties when I heard it, that same sliding sound, then a heavy thud. This time the building was empty except for me and Clara. I called out, "Clara?" That you?" No answer. When I got to aisle 17, there it was. Same black book, lying open on the carpet. I flipped through a few pages. The handwriting was jagged, almost cramped, with occasional ink blots bleeding into the fibers. Every few pages there were small diagrams, circles intersected by strange runes, shapes that reminded me of astronomical charts, except wrong. I shut it fast and carried it up front. "Here, this is what I meant." Clara took one look at it and frowned. She opened it, turned a few pages, then abruptly shut it. "This isn't ours," she said flatly. "Then where?" "Lock it in the supply cabinet. Bottom drawer. Don't touch it again." 3 nights later, I was closing alone. Clara had gone home early. When I went to the archives to make the final sweep, the black book was sitting on a table in plain sight. The supply cabinet was locked. I checked. I stood there for a long moment, every part of me trying to rationalize it. Maybe Clara had taken it out earlier and forgotten. Maybe Nathan or Richard had somehow gotten into the cabinet, except no one had been back there all night. I knew because I'd been shelving in that section for hours. I don't know why I opened it. Curiosity, stupidity, maybe the sense that I was already in too deep. The text was different. The first time I'd seen it, the letters had been tiny and tightly packed. Now they were larger, messier, the ink darker as if it were fresh. And this time, I could make out a few English words scattered in the margins. East stack, behind, turn away. I dropped it on the table and stepped back. That was when I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from behind one of the shelves. "Hello," my voice cracked. The footsteps stopped. I didn't wait. I left the book, hurried up front, and locked the doors early. It was the week before Thanksgiving, and I'd already decided to quit. My mom said I'd been jumpy lately, flinching at small noises, leaving lights on in every room at home. That night, the power flickered twice during my shift. The second time, the lights didn't come back right away, just enough of a delay to make my skin crawl. When they finally steadied, I went to do my last walkthrough. The archives felt colder than ever, the air thick, like it was harder to breathe. Halfway down aisle 17, I stopped dead. The black book wasn't on the floor. It was upright in the middle of the aisle, standing on its bottom edge like someone had placed it there carefully. Its pages fanned slightly, like it was breathing. I backed away. Behind me, somewhere deep in the shelves, came the soft, unmistakable sound of another book sliding free, then falling. I didn't check. I didn't pick anything up. I left the lights on, locked the doors, and walked out into the cold night air without looking back. I quit the next morning. Clara didn't ask why. I still don't know where that book came from, or why it kept finding its way out of wherever we tried to hide it. But sometimes when I pass the library on my way to the grocery store, I swear I see someone standing in the east stacks through the tall windows. Too still, too tall to be Clara, and I keep walking. Story 7. I was 9 years old the summer it happened. That's old enough to remember things clearly, but still young enough that the edges of the memory should have softened by now. They haven't. Even now, almost 20 years later, I can close my eyes and still see the cracked sidewalk under my sneakers, smell the faint scent of wet grass after the sprinklers shut off, and hear the way the wind rattled the flags in front of Maplewood Library that day. We lived in a quiet neighborhood in Maplewood, Oregon. It was the kind of town where you knew the cashier at the grocery store by name, and if your bike chain popped off, someone's dad would probably come out of his garage to fix it without asking for anything in return. My sister Sophie and I had our summer routine. Breakfast, a couple hours of cartoons or lazing around, and then a walk to the library before it got too hot. Sophie was 5 years older than me, 14, tall, fearless, and endlessly annoyed by me, though she never let anyone else mess with me. She loved mystery novels, anything with detectives and complicated plots. I was more into books with big, colorful illustrations, ones you could flip through and get the whole story without reading every word. That afternoon started like any other. I was sitting cross-legged on our living room carpet, stacking baseball cards when Sophie leaned against the doorway. Sophie, "You coming to the library?" Me, "Now?" Sophie, "Yeah, unless you want to roast in here all day." Me, "What if I'm busy?" Sophie, glancing at my cards. Uh-huh. Super busy. I grinned, gave in, and grabbed my sneakers. Mom didn't mind us going on our own. The library was just under a mile away, straight down Alder Street, then left at the gas station. We'd been making the trip together for years. The air was warm, but not unbearable. That golden mid-July kind of warm, where the pavement radiates heat, but the breeze keeps it from being miserable. The sound of cicadas droned somewhere far off, and the only cars that passed were moving slow enough to give little waves as they went by. I remember Sophie was telling me about some mystery she was halfway through. Something about a missing diamond and a suspect with a fake name. I wasn't really listening. I was thinking about the ice-cold water fountain inside the library. By the time we reached the brick building, the sky had shifted. Still sunny, but with a thin, pale layer of clouds dulling the light. The automatic doors sighed open, letting out that familiar mix of cool air and the faint, musty smell of old paper. Mrs. Green, the head librarian, sat behind the front desk. She was maybe in her late 60s, with a gray bun and sharp eyes that could spot a bent book spine from 20 feet away. Mrs. Green. Afternoon, Sophie. Afternoon, Eli. Sophie. Hey, Mrs. Green. Me. Hi. We split up as usual, Sophie heading to the teen section in the far back, and me straight to the children's shelves near the big bay window. I'd been sitting cross-legged for maybe 5 minutes, flipping through a book about deep-sea creatures, when I noticed movement. A boy, maybe 11, stood at the end of the aisle. He had messy blonde hair and pale skin, and he was staring right at me. Not in the curious way strangers sometimes do, but like he'd been watching me for a while. Boy, what are you reading? Me, holding up the cover. About fish. Boy, snorting. That's a baby book. Me, it's not. Boy, bet you don't even know what half the words mean. His voice was flat but had this edge to it, like he was trying to provoke me. I looked back down at my book, hoping he'd get bored. Me, I can read it. Boy, smirking. You don't look like you can. My ears burned. I didn't know this kid. I'd never seen him before in town. Before I could say anything else, he muttered something I didn't catch and wandered off. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. It happened maybe 3 minutes later. I felt a dull thump on my back. A book slid onto the carpet beside me. Before I could process it, another flew from the next aisle, hitting my shoulder. I turned just in time to see the blonde kid peering around the shelf, grinning. Boy. Catch! Another book sailed my way. I fumbled, dropping it. I didn't want to yell. Libraries were supposed to be quiet, but my heart was pounding and my hands were shaking, not from pain, but from the weirdness of it. Kids tease, sure, but throwing books? I got up and walked fast, almost ran to find Sophie. She was sitting against the wall in her section, nose buried in a thick hardcover. Me. Some kid's throwing books at me. Sophie, snapping her head up. What kid? Me. Blonde. About your height. He. Sophie. Show me. Her voice was firm, the way it got when she was ready to handle something. We went back to the children's section, but the boy was gone. We decided to check out our books and head home. That's when we heard it, yelling. It was coming from near the front desk. We rounded the corner and there he was, the blonde kid, red-faced, shouting at Mrs. Green. I couldn't catch every word, but it was something about stupid rules and you can't make me. Then without warning, he stormed over to a display cart and shoved it hard. Books toppled, papers fluttered across the carpet. A man in a wrinkled t-shirt and baseball cap stepped forward. His dad, I assumed. His voice boomed across the library, not in defense of the librarian, but joining in. Man, this place is a joke. You hear me? He grabbed the boy by the arm. They made for the exit, but not before the man turned and hurled a curse loud enough to make my stomach knot. The doors slid shut behind them. Silence. Sophie and I stood frozen. Then she leaned down and whispered, Sophie, guess we know where he learned it. We checked out quickly. As we stepped outside, I glanced toward the parking lot. For a second, I thought I saw the blonde kid standing by the far hedge, just watching us. But then a car pulled out, blocking my view, and when it passed, he was gone. I never saw him again. But sometimes when I walk past a library and catch that faint smell of old paper in the air, my stomach still tightens. And I think about how quickly an ordinary place can turn strange. Story 8. I never planned on working at the library. It wasn't that I hated the place. Honestly, I'd spent more hours there than in my own dorm room during my freshman year. But the idea of being trapped behind a desk for hours, stamping due dates and sorting returns, felt like the sort of thing that would slowly rot my brain. But plans have a way of collapsing when your bank account starts gasping for air. It was the middle of my second semester at Fairview College, a mid-sized liberal arts school tucked into a sleepy corner of upstate New York. My meal plan was bare bones. My rent was covered thanks to my scholarship, and my textbooks came from the used bookstore 2 blocks down. But everything else, coffee, laundry, late-night pizza runs, those all required cash. I'd been scraping by with odd freelance editing gigs, but February hit and my savings hit zero. My roommate Sean was no help. He had a cushy job at the student gym, standing around folding towels, flirting with the girls who came in for yoga. But when I asked if they were hiring, he just shrugged and said, "Nah, man, management's stingy. Try the library. They'll take anyone who can read." The joke stung a little. I could read, obviously. I was an English lit major, but that didn't mean I wanted to spend my nights babysitting dusty shelves. Still, I walked into Fairview Public Library the following Monday and filled out an application. 2 days later, I had the job. The library wasn't technically part of the college. It was the town's main branch. But it was close enough to campus that students made up at least half the evening crowd. I worked 3 nights a week, usually closing shifts from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. My boss, Mrs. Langford, was a tall, steel-haired woman in her 60s with a voice like an old record, calm, scratchy, and slow. She didn't smile much, but she wasn't unkind. "We close at 10 sharp," she told me my first night. "Lights go out at 10:15. Before you lock the doors, walk every aisle. People fall asleep, get lost in their phones. You'd be surprised how many we find still sitting here after hours." At first it felt ridiculous, pacing up and down every aisle, calling out closing time into empty spaces, but the habit settled into my bones. Most nights were uneventful. Students came in, found a spot, and disappeared into their work. Older locals drifted through, borrowing novels or browsing newspapers. I'd read at the front desk, occasionally stamping returns or reshelving carts. I liked the quiet. It gave me room to think. It was a Thursday in early March, one of those cold, brittle nights where the wind made the windows hum. I got to the library at 6, hung up my coat, and made small talk with Julia, the day shift clerk, before she left. "Light crowd tonight," she said, zipping her bag. "Weather's keeping everyone home." She wasn't wrong. By 8, there were only 5 or 6 patrons scattered through the building. A couple of grad students were holed up in the study rooms. One older man was reading a newspaper by the periodical section, and 2 kids in hoodies were whispering over a laptop. At 8:15, the front door opened. A man walked in, maybe late 40s, early 50s, thin build, thinning hair, wearing an oversized green hoodie and dark jeans. No backpack, no books in his hands. His eyes didn't roam the space like most first-time visitors. He didn't even glance at me as he passed the desk. He just walked straight toward the non-fiction stacks near the back. Something in my stomach tightened. Not fear exactly, just the faint static of noticing something that didn't fit. I tapped the keyboard, pretending to check the catalog, but my eyes followed him until he disappeared between shelves. By 9:30, the library was almost empty. The grad students packed up, the older man folded his newspaper and left, and the kids with the laptop headed out into the cold. That left just me and the man in the hoodie. I hadn't seen him come back to the desk, hadn't heard footsteps. I checked the security feed on the old computer. Grainy black and white cameras that covered most of the main floor. There he was, camera 4, aisle 9, standing perfectly still between 2 tall shelves. Not browsing, not reading, just standing. I pressed the intercom button, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet. "Attention, the library will be closing in 15 minutes. Please bring any materials to the front desk." No movement on the monitor. At 9:55, I announced again, 5 minutes until closing. Please make your way to the exit. Still nothing. I told myself it was fine. People got lost in thought all the time. I grabbed the small flashlight from the drawer, standard closing protocol, and walked toward aisle 9. The carpet muted my steps. The overhead lights flickered faintly, shadows twitching across the shelves. "Sir?" I called softly. "We're closing. I can help you check out if you're ready." No answer. I turned into the aisle. Empty. I frowned, glancing toward the end, just in time to see movement vanish around the corner. "Sir, we're closed," I said, louder now. "I need you to head toward the exit." Silence. I followed, turning into the next row. Empty again. A prickle crawled up my spine. He wasn't just ignoring me. He was avoiding me. I decided to head back to the desk and call Mrs. Langford. But when I stepped into the open space at the front, he was there, standing behind the desk, in my spot, hands at his sides, watching me. For a second, my brain couldn't process how quietly he must have moved. How fast. I swallowed. "Sir, you can't be back there. You need to leave. Now." No blink, no word. We stared at each other. My heartbeat filled my ears. Then, without a word, he stepped out from behind the desk and walked, slow, deliberate, to the door. He didn't look back as he pushed it open and slipped into the dark. I locked the door in record time, shut off the lights, and stepped into the icy night air. My dorm was a 5-minute walk across campus. The path was empty, snow crunching under my boots. My breath puffed in clouds. Then I heard it. Footsteps. I didn't want to turn. I had to turn. He was there, 20 yards back. I walked faster. So did he. My chest tightened. My breath quickened. The dorm loomed ahead. Yellow-lit windows, safety. Then his footsteps broke into a run. I ran, full tilt. My bag thumped against my hip, my lungs burning. 20 feet. 10. I yanked the dorm door open, stumbled inside, slammed it shut. My eyes darted to the glass panel. Empty sidewalk. He was gone. I never saw him again. But every night after that, walking home from the library, I listened. And sometimes when the wind died just enough, I swore I could still hear those footsteps.